This is an example essay from LA1 and it is an essay that achieved full marks in the exam. So hopefully this video and activity will help you to achieve the same level of grade in your own exam. If we have a look at the introduction, what you'll be able to see is that the author has written something that's very clear, concise, and specific extracts have been identified. There's no waffle at all, and it purely talks about the two extracts that they're going to be looking at and why they're going to be looking at them. And the theme is implied within that because you're looking at the relationship between Stanley and Blanche. Okay, what you can see from this opening sentence is that again we've got a really clear point. It's once more concise. So Stanley's entrance in scene 10 is typically brash and headstrong. Just the use of that word typically suggests a pattern. And pattern spotting is really important to show the examiner that you know the play or the novel inside out. What we've then got is a series of quotes, and they are well integrated all the way through. And we've also got a range of terminology. If I just read you this paragraph, Williams contrasts the adverb softly, used to describe the honky-tonk musical underscoring, with the violent verb slamming to describe Stanley's treatment of the door. This juxtaposition of sound effects would doubtless shock the audience somewhat, foreshadowing the fact that Stanley is about to disturb Blanche's happy solitude and much else besides. Furthermore, his opening lines of dialogue contain numerous interrogative sentences. He begins by demanding, "How is my sister?" following this with, "And how is this baby?" This series of blunt questions, phrased as simple sentences, quickly restores the suspicious, mistrusting tone Stanley has developed during the course of the play to deal with Blanche. Her compulsive being and fanciful stories hold no sway with him. So what you can see from this is that range of terminology is continued throughout. There's no let up at all. We've got sentence types in there, we've got word classes, we've got juxtaposition, foreshadowing, other elements of contrast. And what you'll see is that continues throughout the essay. There is no let up at all. So even within this paragraph, that model is replicated throughout. Okay, if we have a look at how this paragraph is ended, although this is not an unusual behaviour for Stanley, he does this the first time he encounters Blanche too, what you can see is that the author has made a link to a previous event. It does serve to remind the audience of his striking arrogance and disregard for the feelings of others, particularly the women whose respect and adulation he demands. So here we're really referencing audience response, and that's important. So Williams is there throughout when you're looking at the language. But then we also have just as much awareness of the audience and their reactions. Later on, so you've got the paragraph started with a connection to the previous paragraph. Now this isn't quite as advanced as I've been promoting that you guys do it, but it is one of the connectives that I suggested you use if you do struggle to make a more valid connection. Stanley moves into a string of exclamative accusations after hearing Blanche's fanciful stories about her semi-litigious former suitor, Shep Huntley. He exclaims there isn't a goddamn thing but imagination, following this with, and lies and conceit and tricks. Using a triplet and synthetic listing to reinforce the impact of each noun, increasing the pace of the dialogue as Stanley dares to merely mock Blanche and play with her fragile mental state and begins to actively challenge and insult her. So what we're talking about here is that they've integrated the two characters' relationship. They've referenced a triplet, synthetic listing, the impact of each noun. So we've actually got multiple terminologies just in one element there, and you should try and do that with your own quotes. So whatever you pick out, just try to apply as much terminology as you possibly can. They've implied the effects here, so it increases the pace. We've looked at the effect of those things. So before, the sounds were creating a certain atmosphere. Here it's all about pace. So they've integrated that effect on the audience quite subtly. Williams uses the harsh-sounding alliteration of crazy crown to add a sharp edge to Stanley's open derision of his sister-in-law. After changing into brilliant silk pyjamas, however, Stanley's attitude becomes more sinister still. The stage directions describe him biting his tongue, which protrudes between his lips. So what you've got is that the writer is continuing to really analyse in depth, and we carry on this idea of animalistic imagery, and the harsh, loud tone of the earlier exclamatives is reduced momentarily when Williams uses the adverb softly. So you've got this comparison between the start of the paragraph, where we're looking at exclamatory sentences, to later on when we're looking at animalistic imagery, but the writer hasn't lost the relationship between those two things. So the terminology continues throughout, and the audience is considered throughout also. So what we can see in this second part of the essay is that the writer's style of writing completely continues. So at the start of this paragraph, we've got an opening line that does link to context, but what it also does is advance the description that we've got. So we've made a connection to the previous point again. Because we've got here, Williams takes Stanley beyond a mere antagonist, transforming him into a much more warped, twisted figure. So we've gone from what they were analysing to where we are now with the character in terms of just being a more menacing person. You can see that the level of integrated quotes and the continuance of the inclusion of terminology is entirely continued here. That didn't make sense, just ignore me. But yeah, we've got terminology and integrated quotes that just continue all the way through. It's really, really consistent. We then have the connection to the final scene of the play. We talk about the relationship a little bit more, so you can see that the relationship is being shown to be developed, therefore they've connected to lots of other elements of the play in terms of how they are with each other compared to before. So we get reference to the relationship with Stella, so we've got reference to other characters and events within that. In this final paragraph, again, the terminology continues. Choice of the adjectives split and broken could equally describe Blanche, and the interrogative leads the actor to a mocking delivery of the line as Stanley crows over his destruction of Blanche. What you can see throughout this essay is that they haven't necessarily explicitly talked about audience. What they have done is implied how the audience feels through the analysis of language that they've undertaken. We have got certain elements of us, which I would say is to be avoided, but it reminds us of Stanley's capacity to be suddenly violent. So this is where it's implied how the audience are made to feel. We're probably not going to take that well to a character who is violent and threatening. So the mention of audience is more implicit than explicit. What you can see at the end here is that we've got one final summary sentence that really acts as the conclusion. So summary sentence acts as conclusion. And what they haven't done at the end of this essay is talked really about Williams's message, which would have been an ideal opportunity to do it. There has been references throughout to the 1940s patriarchal society. So we have got reference to the fact that Williams was kind of exploring the differences between men and women and the society at the time of writing. But what the writer of this essay could have done is just made that a little bit more explicit at the end of this essay. Okay, you can see throughout that this is a brilliant examination essay. The aspects that make it so are the integrated quotes, the very close and concise language analysis, and the variety of terminology throughout, which shows just how confident the writer is with the content of the examination and meeting the requirements of that. So your task is to now go and replicate this for one of the novels that we've studied. Maybe start with one paragraph of analysis that looks like this to start with, just so that you can get the hang of writing in this kind of style, and then you can develop it from there.